right, here we go. So welcome to day 2, webinar 2 about the discernment paper. Welcome everybody. So let me kind of set the scene here a little bit. First of all, you can see, or you will be able to see in a second, our course shell, yes. And so here's the announcements at the beginning of the first page, and it says here the live webinars about the discernment paper. So where we are is here, Thursday, the 9th of April. On Tuesday, we did this one on what's a concept. Now, if you go to I go to the assignments, and you click on the discernment paper. If you click on the discernment paper assignment, you can scroll down here and bam, there it is. Webinar number 1, what's a concept? It's right here. It's attached to this particular Understanding Concepts Prezi. So that's all up. Now, if you scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see webinar number 2, what's with the critters? I'm going to, as soon as we get done today and it does its magic with the video, I'll have a link and I'll put it up here. It's attached to this particular critter Prezi, which you can access. I'm going to show it on the screen and talk through it today. And then I'm also going to put a little handout up there. I'm not quite done editing it, so I want to get that edited and up there a little later today as well. So that'll be there. So I'm going to keep uploading the webinars to here and attaching them to some of this other information that we have. So that's where you can find everything under the discernment paper assignment. Okay. Oh, and some people have requested that I put it up on the YouTube channel, which I don't have it up there yet, but let's see here. With Roman YouTube, there it is, hot diggity. So I have a few videos up here. Also, Katrina and Brittany have put some things up here. So I'll put the other webinar and this one on here as well later today. Okay, so that is that. Let's dive in, right? So here is our wonderful, yeah.
I just wanted to interject about the YouTube channel really quick.
Yeah.
In case someone watches this recording and they're not seeing other things, but I wanted to let everybody know that Brittany and I do like a YouTube channel update every Monday. So every Monday, Brittany and I will let you know what to kind of look forward to the coming week, you know, kind of like give you a checklist and hopefully answer any questions that you may have about upcoming assignments. So make sure that you check those out. They're usually, you know, about 10 minutes. So they're not going to take too much of your time.
Right on. So, some of you may remember, some of you may have forgotten, but about the first day of class, maybe the second day of class, we talked about critters, we talked about conceptual ecology, and we talked a little bit about the discernment paper saying, hey, we're going to write this thing later on in the semester, and you need to know a little bit about these critters to be thinking through it. And then on each of your engage and reflect assignments, the reflect piece, you're asked to identify some of the critters that are running around in your conceptual ecology. So it's time to come back to that now. And I want to talk about those critters and why we're talking about critters and all that kind of stuff so that you can write your final paper, and not just your paper, but you can think about those critters that are running around in your head. So, welcome to Critters in Your Conceptual Ecology, and let's dive in. And the first thing that I want to do is kind of set the scene for why we're talking about critters, why we're talking about conceptual ecology. Then I'll get into some of the actual critters, what they are, that sort of stuff, and then we'll be done. Okay, but here's the big point. It's right here. The reason we're talking about conceptual change and the reason we're talking about critters is because learning happens because of what's happening inside of the conceptual ecology of each one of us. We learn or don't learn because of those critters. Like, we get new information presented to us, and because of what that new information runs into when it comes into our head, we either learn it or don't learn it. And so it's really important that we pay attention to those critters that are running around in our conceptual ecology. So there used to be this idea that students were blank slates, that children were blank slates, that there wasn't anything written on them yet, and that's what our job was as adults, as parents, as teachers, was to write on those blank slates and fill those empty vessels, those empty brains with knowledge. That's crap. And we've kind of come up with some better thinking about what's actually happening when we learn or when we're not learning. So let's get into why. So why are we talking about this conceptual change thing? Because there were some educators, some science educators, back in like the 70s and 80s, who were like, man, we got a problem going on here. And they'd sit there and they'd give these tests, and the students in the class, they'd pass the tests, some of them. But what the teachers saw was when they'd ask the students, hey, like, tell me more about what you think about this, the students were wrong, terribly wrong. They were totally off on their understanding of basic scientific principles, stuff the teachers had been teaching in the class. So there's this weird thing going on. They seem to be able to pass kind of our tests, but they're not able to actually talk about any of this stuff. They really don't understand what we've been teaching them. And so these science educators are like, dang, what are we going to do about this? Because this is a problem. And it was a problem that they were seeing in lots of places, lots of different science classes. And then they saw it, other teachers in other areas were saying the same sorts of things. But it's these dang science education people, they're the problem here. And what they did is they said, okay, so what's going on in our kids, our students? And they started thinking about, how do we teach, what happens when we learn, that sort of stuff. So the first thing they did is they kind of thought about what is learning. Like, what are we really trying to do? Our students are getting information from us, and they're able to barf that back to us on our tests. But they haven't really learned, right? They aren't learning what we really want them to learn. They're just able to give us some information. So they said, hey, wait a minute, what learning is really about is it's about ideas. It's about comprehending big concepts. Now, yeah, we're going to make them do experiments, and yeah, we're going to make them do these different things, and yeah, we're probably going to make them take tests, but it's not after that. That's not what we're really after. We're after these big ideas, these scientific ideas, at least these folks, that they get these things. And so they say that learning, and here's this quote, learning is fundamentally coming to comprehend and accept ideas. It is not simply the acquisition of a set of correct responses on the dang tests. It's not about a verbal repertoire, having the vocabulary and that sort of stuff. And it's not about a set of behaviors, but it's about getting students to comprehend and accept ideas. So based upon that, they're kind of sitting there going, well, why the heck aren't they getting the ideas that we're trying to teach them, right? And so here's what they kind of came up with is they thought, we're presenting ideas to our students, but our students aren't accepting them, right? They're not taking them in. They're taking the vocabulary, sure, and all that other kind of crud, but they're not really taking in the big ideas. They're not really understanding stuff. So what's going on there? And so they came up with these ideas that are on the screen here. And they said, okay, new ideas that we're teaching aren't just coming onto a blank slate, aren't just, being written on a blank mind. there's a mind there that has ideas already, that has concepts already. There's this context of ideas that students already have. And that context of ideas, they call the conceptual ecology. There's this ecosystem in our brain, not a physical one, but an ecosystem of ideas. And new ideas got to come into that already existing ecology. And when a new critter, a new concept comes in, you know, sometimes it gets accepted and sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it's the concepts that are there already fight back and don't let a new idea in. And so that started to help explain what was going on with their students who, you know, they'd ask them simple things like, you know, why do the leaves turn, you know, colors? And, you know, how do you explain the seasons? You know, everyday kind of stuff. And students had these bizarre ideas to explain things. They were not what we had taught in class. And so these science educators said, well, oh, so they have ideas in there already that are interfering with them learning the new ideas. So I had this boss years ago who would talk about what we know limits what we can know. And I always, you know, like at first I was like, what? That ain't right. You know, you're supposed to know more, learn more, more is better, right? No, she was like, you know, the more you think you know shuts you off to learning other things. And I think that's the same idea here of we've got a lot of stuff already in our heads in this conceptual ecology. And the job of a teacher, look down at the bottom point there, the teacher's job is to kind of confront students with their attempts to not change their concepts. So there's a couple of ideas here, and you can see them kind of highlighted on the screen. There's the one idea is assimilation, and the other idea is accommodation, okay? So those two ideas are important for us here. The science educator said that what people do is when they are presented with something new, they first try to assimilate it. They use their existing ideas to kind of cope with this new idea and understand it with their old ideas. And this is, we know this, right? Like this is what learning is. We you know, as teachers, we're like, okay, you have some new information you're going to teach. Now you have to attach it to stuff that students already know, right? So figure out what they already know and build upon that to build this new idea. So we're kind of familiar with what they called assimilation or assimilating information. But our concept change people are saying, yeah, but oftentimes our old concepts are the problem, right? Our old concepts are the ones getting in the way. And so what they said is we got to do some accommodation. And what accommodation is that sometimes you gotta, here, let me show you this. You gotta reorganize or replace old concepts. You got to kick those old ideas out. You got to move them to the side. You got to shuffle things around and make space for the new idea, the new thinking, the new information, so that we have to accommodate. And so they came up with some ideas about how do we do that? How do we help students accommodate new ideas? So that's a different webinar. This webinar is about, okay, so what is in our brain? What is this conceptual ecology that exists in our brains prior to being taught anything, potentially? What's in there? What's helping us learn or what's getting in the way of us learning? That's what we're after. So what is a conceptual ecology? Our wonderful, yeah, young lady in the front row, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay, so really quick, I just want to like interject and talk about for a minute how I think about these things.
Beautiful.
I'm not sure if this is going to be helpful, but it's like another interpretation.
Go for it.
Kind of this idea of like a misconception, right, can coexist with what I think the teacher wants on the test, right? So I think even I'm going to cycle back a little bit to what you said about like the science educators and how they were seeing like students could like memorize stuff and like barf it out for the test, right? But they couldn't take that information, like maybe they were able to define a theory, they could not then apply that theory to like a new context to explain a new experiment that would happen, right? So the students were memorizing this stuff, but they weren't able to apply it to, you know, okay, if I know this, then what can I expect to happen in this situation? So that's how I kind of think about this. And then, so like I memorized all this stuff for the teacher, but then like I still think that the leaves on the trees change because I don't even know, like maybe someone goes around and paints them, right? Like it's an art project. And so the leaves on the trees are changing colors because I know a local artist that's painting all the leaves, right? Even though maybe in class we talked about like the chemical process that happens, but I'm not able to apply that knowledge. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that for all of you all who are working on your final papers, right, you might realize in writing, like, you know, maybe I did come into class with some of these misconceptions. Like maybe I was always told this, but then maybe I was actually believing this. So I just kind of wanted to, I don't know, Dr. Vroman, if you have like something more, but that's kind of how I think about this whole thing. And then as far as like my own ecology, right, my own ecology is filled with like my own experiences, not only like my lived experiences, but also my experiences with certain subjects, right, that could potentially like influence me to be more open to something or to be more closed. So I look at critters as like, this is all a form of, I say bias. I don't know what Dr. Roman's going to think, but I look at it as like a form of bias. Like my personal experiences make me more open and more agreeable to listening to someone with a doctorate degree because I think they know things, right? But then why do I maybe not listen to my mom? Like, does she not know as much, right? So like, why am I placing more weight with one person, right? So like that critter in my head, in my experiences, is drawing me more towards something or pushing me away towards something else. And that's why I use that word bias. It may not be the best word there, but our critters are pushing and pulling us towards things, whether we realize it or not.
Yep, absolutely. And bias, I think, is okay. You know, bias is not necessarily it's not a bad thing. Like, it's not discriminatory. Bias is like, I'm biased towards Mountain Dew, right? I'll drink, no, I won't drink coffee, but, you know, I have a bias towards certain beverages. I have a bias towards, and some of those are based on rational thinking, most aren't. Anyway, yeah, I think bias is an okay word. We have lots of those in our conceptual ecology. So, yeah. So what is a conceptual ecology? On your screen here, you got an idea of what it is. It's an inventory, and we're going to look at the inventory. It's an inventory of the kinds of cognitive artifacts that learners are likely to possess in their conceptual ecology. And it's stuff that our wonderful Strike and Posner and them say that we as teachers must pay attention to. Why? They say that misconceptions, misunderstandings, maybe biases, are a tendency to see the world in a particular way, right? That results from something in our conceptual ecology. So in individuals' conceptual ecology. So it could be something in yours that's not in mine, right? But misconceptions come from these critters that are running around in our conceptual ecologies, okay? And they said that what's probably most important for us when we're thinking about teaching and learning and so forth is to understand the factors right here, understanding the factors in learners' conceptual ecologies that generate and maintain those misconceptions. So we need to pay attention to and look for those things in each individual. You talk about differentiation. That's what this is. We're not talking about you're going to differentiate because I'm a visual learner. Right? No, differentiation really is about thinking about what's in each individual student's conceptual ecology and what's getting in their way, right, from learning, right? So what they also say is that a teacher should spend the bulk of their time doing two things. One, diagnosing errors in student thinking. So, learning about the student, figuring out, oh crap, that's why they're saying this. That's why they're giving me this answer. So diagnosing what the problem is with the student's thinking. Not what's wrong with the student, but what's wrong with their thinking. What's wrong? What's in their conceptual ecology that's getting in the way? And then, and I love this, is identifying defensive moves, right? So that students use to avoid accommodating new ideas. We use all sorts of defensive tactics to say, I'm not going to learn, no, that's not okay, right? We do that a lot. The easiest one is we just don't do our homework, right? Like that's a bunch of crap. It's too hard, right? But that idea of it's too hard, it's a bunch of crap, those are critters running around in our head. And so what our wonderful science educators did was they said, okay, what is in this inventory? What are the critters that we as educators need to know about, and so forth. So, and I'm just a little aside here. I love this quote out of Strike and Posner's article. They said, the problem a learner is solving in a classroom may often not be the problem that you're teaching them. That they're working on their conceptual ecology. They're not working on what you're teaching. And even if they are working on what you're teaching, they're working on it with tools that are in their conceptual ecology. So the problem that they're actually working on is this stuff inside their head. I think that's huge. So a kid that's not paying attention, or a kid that's getting it wrong, or a kid that, right, is probably doing that because of whatever's going on in their conceptual ecology. So that's why this is kind of important for educators. Also, well, see, teachers have to become aware of what's going on in their conceptual ecology. And that's why we're asking you to write this paper, is we want you to start recognizing, if you haven't started yet, but start recognizing those critters, because those critters are going to influence how you teach students. They're going to influence how you think about creating a lesson. They're going to influence how you assess students. All of it comes back to your critters. So let's keep going. So the big question probably people are going to have is, okay, great, Vroman. So how am I going to use this in my paper? Okay. And our wonderful authors about conceptual ecology that you'll be reading in a few weeks, give us some insights about how you might use this in your paper. So in your paper, we're asking you to answer a basic question. To what degree have I experienced conceptual change? That's what we're asking you to answer. And you can say, I've had 100% conceptual change. I've had 50% conceptual change. I've had 0%. To what degree have you had conceptual change? And the way you can answer that is by describing your conceptual ecology. You have had conceptual change or not because of critters that are in your conceptual ecology. Like, you've been opened up to change or closed off to change. You've accepted new ideas or rejected new ideas based upon your conceptual ecology. Not because the ideas are good or bad. Not because of how you were taught. Oh, that crappy teacher, they didn't teach me very well. Bull roar. you accept or deny learning based upon what's going on in your conceptual ecology. So it's kind of important for you to understand what's going on in there. Another thing, so what we're going to ask you to do is identify those critters in your paper. Now, you could write the paper in a variety of different ways. You don't have to write about critters, but it's a big piece, and it's a nice, easy tool to use, but you don't have to use them. But one way to write the paper is to talk about those critters that are going on inside of you that have either helped you accommodate or change a concept or refuse to. One of the things that they also talk about is this thing they call a developmental history. And what they say is each one of our concepts has a developmental history. We have, if you could interview each of your concepts, you could go back and say, well, you know, I started thinking this way back when I was, you know, before I was born in utero and my mom took drugs, right? And so that affected my concepts, right? You could interview a concept and say, I learned this in second grade, or I was taught this sort of thing by my uncle's cousin's sister, right? Or, right, that you comprehended and accepted all the concepts that you have at one point or another. Now, it might have been the 2-year-old version of you that accepted it, and thus it's so fundamental to how you think about things. You know, it's not the 18-year-old version of you that accepted all these concepts. It was the much younger versions of you who did. And so part of what you may do in this paper is you may say, you know, the reason I changed a concept or the reason I didn't change a concept was because this thing got in my way, or this thing helped me out, and this thing, there's a developmental history to it. This concept, this critter in my conceptual ecology, there's a history to that thing. And you could write about the history of your conceptual ecology. You could write about the history of some of those critters that are influencing what you've learned or not learned, okay? And then this last statement on your screen there is, you know, I want you to reflect on how these critters and their histories have either kept you from changing a concept or learning new things, or how they've helped you, okay? So one way to write the paper is to talk about critters and where those critters came from and why you have them and why you've changed or not changed, all right? So that's kind of how you can use it in this paper. So back here, the way I think about a conceptual ecology is it's like this ecosystem. It's like the Serengeti Desert, right? You got some gazelles, you got back in those trees, I swear there's a tiger. He's right, you see him right there? There's something, I don't think that's a log, I think that's a big cat, right? Anyway, there are critters lurking around inside of our brains, inside of, like this picture is a picture of my brain, and some of it's like those tangled branches and stuff back over here, and some of it's got these gazelles, or I don't know what those are, and these birds, like there's all sorts of critters roaming around, and those critters have names. And those names were created by these dorky science education people who came up with the worst possible names for some of them. But let me introduce you to some of them. So, oh, don't want to go there yet. How do we go? No, don't want to go there. Oh, okay. Ignore what's on your screen. Oh my God, how did I get past? Okay. Oh, good Lord. There we go. So, what are these critters? And if you look over here, there's 9 different kinds of critters that those science ed people said are in our conceptual ecology. They came up with 9. There's probably more, and each one of these 9 have sub critters, you know, smaller versions of them, right? And so what are all these things that are running around in our brains? Okay. And I'm not going to talk about every single one of them. I'm going to focus on a few of them. And if anybody has any questions or wants me to talk about a particular one, then they should, you know, scream out at me, and I'll try to go into them. So the first one that we introduced the first day of class, I think it was, and this is a pretty common one. It is the lion of the jungle, you know, the king of the jungle. The lions of our conceptual ecology, in my opinion, are past experiences. And past experiences, whether they are formal, from formal instruction, whether you were specifically taught by somebody to think something, to know something, right? Or if it was just from personal experience, like you have lived experience. Either way, these past experiences are a major source of authority. If you've lived something, if you were specifically taught something, the authority of that teacher, the authority of that lived experience is huge. And that means if you were abducted by aliens, right, and you had a lived experience with that, and you can say, you know, this thing on the back of my neck, that's where I've been watching the X-Files recently. So anyway, this thing on the back of my neck where they put an implant in me, if you had that experience, there's not a whole lot I can do to convince you otherwise. I could show you all kinds of evidence, all kinds of research, all decades of scientific research that shows that there is not alien life out there. And you'd still believe that you were abducted by aliens because you had an experience which you understood as abduction, right? Our experiences allow us to deny all kinds of other information and knowledge. Now, our experiences can also open us up. Our experiences can open us up to say, you know, like personally, I've been in a number of situations in my life where I was the only one of my kind, right? In a situation. And now it took me like 20 years to start getting those sorts of experiences. But once I did, I kind of liked them. There was something about it that, you know, even though I was yelled at or I had stuff thrown at me and stuff like that, I started to not enjoy those experiences, but I started to see that I needed to get myself out of my own comfort zone and that sort of stuff. So sometimes our experiences lead us to other experiences, open us up to other experiences. So they're a really strong authority, okay? So I'm gonna skip through a couple slides here. And there's some other kinds of critters. And the next three, I think, are kind of these nature of knowledge, nature of learning, nature of concepts. And they're all kind of related. And so here's what it is. If you have a nature of knowledge critter, or you could call it a nature of knowledge concept in your conceptual ecology, what it is it's your beliefs about knowledge, like this one, nature of knowledge. How do you think we get knowledge? Who has knowledge? Who doesn't have knowledge? How is it transmitted from one person to another, or from books to humans? How do we store your beliefs about those things and your students' beliefs about those things? You know, students have beliefs. They may not have articulated them, but they've got a belief in their conceptual ecology about who has knowledge and who doesn't have knowledge. So, for example, let's say we have this expert who comes and talks to us about platypuses, and this expert happens to be Will Ferrell, right? Now, if you know Will Ferrell, he's a comedian, and you know he's not an expert on platypuses. I don't know what it is. Anyway, I'm not an expert. But you have a belief inside of you of who has knowledge and who doesn't, who's an authority figure and who's not. And based upon that, and this is what Katrina was talking about a little earlier, you either believe them or you don't. So your mother, Katrina, nothing against your mom, may not be an expert on everything, right? And so you don't listen to her in some situations when maybe you should. And you do listen to her when maybe you shouldn't, because of concepts that are in your conceptual ecology that have to do with this nature of knowledge critter. You believe certain people have knowledge and certain people don't. You also may have beliefs about how knowledge is transmitted. Is it transmitted through this sort of dialogue sort of thing? Is knowledge transmitted only from good books? Like you got to read the right books and then you've got real knowledge. That sort of thing. So sometimes what we have are these critters about the nature of knowledge. We have nature of knowledge critters that either open us up or close us off to learning new things. Okay? Same thing. I'm going to skip through a few of these. There's a lot of little examples here. And by the way, most of these critters that I'm talking about, they come out of the Park article. Now, somebody in your Strand team is probably going to read the Park article. Yes, Katrina?
I should have read the Park article during this one. Can you hear me?
Wait, I can't hear you very well.
How about now? Testing, testing.
Go for it.
Okay, so everyone should have read the Park article like week 1 or 2, because we did the critter card assignment and we said, everybody read the Park article and then work on critter cards. So everyone should have read the Park article already. And then I also wanted to ask, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Broman. So the nature of knowledge, is this what I believe knowledge is?
That would be a type of nature of knowledge concept. Yes.
Okay, so because like I read through all of this morning in preparation for this beautiful webinar, and that's like what the note I have there. It's like what I believe knowledge is, right? Yep. So if I believe that knowledge comes from the experts, right? That's what it is. That's where it comes from. Yeah. Okay. I have more like little like interpretations as you go through this. I have like kind of like my own little interpretations as well. But yeah, keep going.
Please. Okay. The Park article has kind of descriptions of each of these critters, and that's where I kind of organized this Prezi based upon that article. So another one is this nature of concepts. Same thing as kind of nature of knowledge. This is nature of concepts. So we have nature of concepts in our conceptual ecology that tell us, you know, where do these concepts come from? What are they? Where do they come from? And what Park says is there's kind of two major ways that people think about where concepts come from, how they're created. And one of them is through analogies and metaphors, and the other is examples. So if you tell me something and you give me some new knowledge, right? The way that turns into a concept that I can consume, that I can take in, is usually through analogies or metaphors and examples, right? If I don't give you an analogy, if I don't give you an example, it makes it, you got to come up with it yourself. And so sometimes we come up with our own analogies, we come up with our own examples, or we borrow them from somebody else. And because of their really kick-ass example of something, we understand it then, right? We can understand a new idea because you've given me a really kick-ass example of it, right? And so where do our concepts come from? You have analogies and metaphors and examples. Those are all critters that are running around in your conceptual ecology. You have an example of a good human being and a bad human being. Though you have hundreds of each one of those probably running around in your head. And each one of those examples helps you understand what a good person is and what a bad person is, right? What a good teacher is, what a bad teacher is. You have examples, exemplars in your mind running around right now telling you what's good and bad about teachers, right? You don't have a clear stated definition of good teacher, bad teacher. You've got tons of examples of them, exemplars. And that's where the concept of what a good teacher comes from, is all these examples. And all of those examples are little mini concepts, right? Dr. War, she was one of my teachers in college. She was this crazy little woman. She had this weird twitch between her eyebrows, and they would twitch all the time. It'd go up and down, whatever. Is an involuntary kind of tick she had. Most people hated her. I loved her. She was magical to me, right? And so when I think of a good teacher, Dr. War's right up there, right? Or when I think about how to set up a classroom, or how to teach a lesson, or how to engage with students, I have these nature of concepts that run around in me. So in your papers, let's say you want to talk about, hey, the reason I accepted this particular new information or this new concept into me is because I had analogies and exemplars that helped me accept it in. Or maybe you've refused it, right? I'll give you an example of the analogy piece, okay? So one of the authors that some people read this semester, his name is Freire, and he has this idea of the banking model of education. And he says there's this banking model of education. He's using an analogy. He's saying that typical education is like a banking transaction, where I, as the teacher, teach you, the student, something new, and I deposit it in you, and then I can withdraw it later on a test, right? And he says that, this is horrible and it's dehumanizing and it oppresses the teacher and the student. He goes into lots of things, but the basic analogy he uses is it depersonalizes us because it turns you, the student, into this receptacle of my deposit, and then I get to withdraw it on a test and everybody's happy, right? So he uses this analogy to kind of describe this really complex process of oppressing through education, okay? And he makes the idea consumable because he creates an analogy with banking, okay? Does that make sense? So some of you understand what he's talking about because you understand banking and so forth. If you didn't understand banking, you wouldn't understand it. Some of you are like, damn, I kind of get what he's talking about, but I don't have any exemplars of, or some of you say, that's all I have is examples of the banking model. I don't have an example of something different from that. So we take in new concepts based upon our concept of concepts. Does that make sense? This one's a little weird, I'll be honest with you. So go ahead.
Okay. So the way I think about analogies is when I started graduate school, I had a professor that was prancing around the room and going on and on and on about this topic that I did not understand. And I continued to raise my hand, and I was like, wait, do you mean that this is a spectrum, or is this a definition of something? So I couldn't even accept this new knowledge without some form of a metaphor, right? Or some form of a visual to help me understand what the heck he was talking about. Because he was like, it's sometimes this and sometimes not this and sometimes this thing. And I was like, what are you talking about? How does this term not have one definition? And so then I started, and he didn't like that I kept interrupting him. But I'm that student. I'll get caught on something and be still thinking about this first thing that we were talking about for a whole 3-hour lecture if I don't get that clarification right away. So then once I realized that he was talking about a spectrum, like within this topic, it could be this one thing. And that was like one side of the thought process with this topic. And then I realized, oh, there's like a middle and then another side of it. Then I realized that the topic we were talking about was not just like one-sided, a definition. And so I needed that analogy of it being like a spectrum to even be able to move forward in the lecture. I would have completely closed off. I would have completely been like, well, I don't understand, and I'm done now. Like, you know, I'm done, bye. So then I'm mentally checked out. I'm, you know, asleep in lecture, whatever it may be. But like, I needed that analogy.
Yes, yes, yes. Beautiful. And see, what you were doing was trying to assimilate new information using your old concepts. And he allowed you to do that. He maybe didn't help out with it so well, but he allowed you to do that because that was acceptable. That worked, right? So yeah, I think let's move on. So skip these sub things. Oh, epistemological commitments. This is one of my favorites. It didn't used to be one of my favorite concepts or critters, but it's becoming one of them. Epistemology is the study of how we know things. Now, you would think that we in the field of education would spend most of our lives trying to learn about epistemology. I think we should. I think we should spend a whole hell of a lot more time studying how do we know things. And if we don't know things, why don't we know things? That would be a good use of our days. Well, we have, go ahead.
So really quick, remember my spectrum of understanding example? It was to understand this. Like, this was the term that I was like, wait, I don't understand. I'm like, what is this? So the way I've boiled this down really quick is how I know that I know. Not sure if that's helpful, but that's how I understand what this is. Like, how do I know that I know this thing? That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great example of this. We have commitments we have critters running around our head that are committed to knowing things a certain way. The reason I put this picture on here of these two like gazelles attacking a leopard is because I have an epistemological commitment to knowing that shouldn't happen, right? Like, that big cat should be eating those two critters, right? But this is a commitment that's being challenged right now by, those gazelles understand things a little bit differently than that leopard, and they're going to kick his ass, right? So we have commitments to knowing certain things a certain way. And these are huge. These are some of the big critters running around in our head, is these epistemological commitments. And you can see on the side here, all these bubbles here, these are different ways, like Katrina was saying, of knowing that you know something. And so we know things because we have analogies and metaphors, right? Which are critters running around in our conceptual ecology. We also know things because of direct observation. We have seen them, we've experienced them, we've seen it ourselves, right? And thus we know something is true or false, right? We know things, we have epistemological commitments to based upon theological grounds, based upon our belief system, our faith, and so forth, our religious persuasions, right? So we know things because we believe them religiously, right? The big one is we have epistemological commitment concepts, critters running around in our conceptual ecology based upon authority. So if Yeah, a prime example today is, do you believe the Dr. Fauci guy or do you believe the Trump guy, right? They seem to have some debates periodically, some disagreements. And some people, and the big argument seems to be, well, you're going to go with science or you're going to go with Trump. Well, if you talk to Trump, he's like, I'm not going after the science part. I'm going after the hope and change sort of part. And so, who's your authority that you're going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the hope guy, or are you going to listen to the science guy with the pandemic sort of thing? Who's your authority? And sometimes we listen to people, even if they're wrong, because they are the authority figure to us, right? Another kind of major kind of epistemological commitment that some people have is to the majority. Most of us do. Most of us. The majority of us say that, well, crap, how can 3 billion people be wrong, right? I'm going to go with what they say. So if the majority, it could be just the majority in our household, it could be the majority in a class. Well, if they say it's that way, then it must be that way. That's our commitment, right? And the last one here is, it makes sense. If something makes sense to you, that carries a bit of authority to you. So if I'll give you kind of a weird example of this. So my friends and I, my nephew and his friend and I, we have this thing. It's called it's Turtles All the Way Down, and it's this notion, like, we'll be having this deep conversation, and somebody will make this really weird connection between a couple things, and we're like, whoa, dude, turtles all the way down, right? And we'll say this, and all of us, all three of us, are like, we get something when somebody says it. We're like, oh shit, yeah, I get it. That's a big complex connection you're making between things that usually aren't connected. Whoa. We have a commitment in our little subgroup that if there are connections between things that aren't typically connected, we see truth to that. We see knowledge in that. We see insight in that. Other people would probably mock us because we're like, no, those things shouldn't be connected at all. But we're like, dude, that's pretty cool. And we see knowledge in that complexity. And it makes sense to us. We see that maybe we don't understand everything, but we're willing to go down this path further. So we all have these weird little epistemological commitment critters that run around in our head that tell us what knowledge is and tell us that we know that that's true. It could be an authority critter. It could be a majority critter. It could be a theological grounds critter. It could be this direct observation critter. Okay? And those tell us what we know and that we know it. All right? Actually, I think these are probably the biggest ones of all. Well, the lions are pretty big. Anyway, I don't know. So I'm going to skip through these and get to this one, metaphysical beliefs. And this one's kind of a little difficult, I think, for a lot of people. But it's like this simple, the dumbed down version of this is kind of your religious beliefs, okay? But it's kind of more broad than that. Your metaphysical beliefs are your beliefs about the ultimate nature of the universe and how the universe works, okay? And little kids have this. They just haven't articulated it. They don't have the right words, maybe, the right words, which are my words, right? They don't have those, but they understand how the world works, how the universe works. And sometimes, well, let's look at this. So one of the ways, let's see here, the list of things that are around the outside of this circle here, the anthropomorphizing, the way it is, the not worthy, the higher power, these are different kinds of metaphysical beliefs. These are different ways that people deal with their belief about how the universe works, okay? So for example, you may believe something or not believe something based upon a metaphysical critter, if you can anthropomorphize it or not. So if you can give it human qualities. So if you can humanize something, then it's believable or acceptable to you. Now, the ability to anthropomorphize, some people say it's a good thing, some people say it's a bad thing. The ability to do that is based upon a metaphysical belief that because it's human-like, because it's like me, I will find value in it. I will understand it. I can understand it. And if I can't do that, then I won't do that, then I can't understand it. Okay? So I don't know if I want to get into it too far, but like the abortion debate is, can you anthropomorphize the fetus or not? Okay? It's based upon a metaphysical belief. Is it human or is it not human? Is it a bunch of cells or is it a human developing into a human, right? And based upon your belief about how the universe works, you're going to believe you can see it as a human or you refuse to see it as a human. You see it as cells or you make it into something that it may not be. It depends on your belief system. But if you can anthropomorphize something or not, that's a metaphysical belief. That's a metaphysical critter running around in your conceptual ecology. This one's kind of hard. I'll be honest, that part I'm not sure I totally get. But let's go on to one that I might get. Another kind of metaphysical belief is if something is unexplainable, it's just the way it is, man. Like, I don't know if you've heard people do that. They're like, this is just the way it is, you know? Then they accept it based upon it. It's just the way it is. They haven't thought about it. They haven't critiqued it. They haven't tried to explain it. They think it's unexplainable, and it's just the way it is. That's a metaphysical belief. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. I think it was last fall. I don't remember. Maybe it was last fall. Maybe it was last spring. But the whole class, we were reading an article in Intro to Ed that talked about how like high income students received a certain type of education, right? They were challenged to question the status quo. They were given the tools to kind of work within different power contexts. And lower income students were not taught those tools. So those lower income students received, even though they were all in the same district, right? They received this different type of education, right? And the teachers had a very different approach. They were like, well, these kids aren't going to amount to anything, so why are we going to teach them, right? And so within one district, we had these very different approaches to who are the students and also what are they capable of. And we were talking about this article in class, and some Intro to Ed students, I said, okay, what do you think about this? Like, is this okay that we have high income students getting this type of education and low income students getting this type of education? And I had an Intro to Ed student just kind of like shrug it off, like, that's the way it is. I can't do anything about it. And I was like, what? And so this student I was talking to had a very different critter than I had, right? My critter was like, we got to do something. This isn't the way it should be, right? But the Intro to Ed student was just like I can't do anything about it. I'm one person. So I kind of look at this as like the shrug, like.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yes. And those are critters, right?
Right.
And what's interesting to me in your example is, I'm assuming the student in other situations with other problems doesn't have that shrug, right? Exactly. That they have other critters that say, oh, on these things, I can do something about it. It is explainable. I can attack it. But on this particular situation, no. That's just the way it is.
Exactly.
Now, what's interesting is, where the hell did that come from? What's the developmental history of that student's conceptual ecology about poverty, let's say, and wealth that says, there's a history to that. Anyway, good. Thank you. Next one. The worth of something, that it's worth knowing, that it's worth understanding, that it's right, that it's worth explaining and digging into. I think this is related to that same student in some respects, that you're going to believe something or not believe something. You're going to accept a new idea or not accept a new idea based upon what you perceive its worth is. There's another slide in here. We'll probably get to it a little bit. We might skip it because of time, but it's, you know how, I don't know about you, but I used to walk across campus when we walked across campus, and there'd be groups sitting out kind of presenting different materials to you, right? You had PETA out there, and you had the pro-life people out there, and you had all these people who would present you with issues that are really important that you need to donate to or become aware of and things like that. And there were some of them who I was like, oh yeah, that's really horrible, but I'm not going to do a damn thing about it. Because in my day, you know, it doesn't apply to me, or it's not a big enough issue for me, or that's this critter, you know, right? So there's a picture later on. It's horrible what I put in this slideshow. There's pictures of rhinoceroses with their horns cut off, okay? Horrible, horrible thing. But I'll be honest with you, and I'm a horrible human being, it doesn't rise to my level of, I need to do something about this today. I got a critter inside of me that says, you know, there are bigger issues or more important or more applicable issues to my life and my day than that. And so on the scale of things, I'm probably not going to do anything for those poor rhinos. I'm a bad human being for it, but that's a critter I got in my head, right? Sorry. Anyway, next one. We're going to skip through here. Oh, this next one. You believe certain things or don't believe certain things based upon your belief in a God or a higher power of some sort. So this is a huge concept with probably multiple sub-concepts, multiple little critters based upon your religious beliefs, right? So, you know, I was raised Catholic, and I got a decent, I got 12 years of Catholic schooling. I got a lot of information from the Bible and lots of stories and analogies and exemplars and so forth. A lot of critters inside of me come from this, right? Whether or not I currently practice Catholicism, which I don't, I got those critters. And they inform what I know and what I accept, what ideas come in and what ideas don't. And I think that's pretty similar with lots of people, right?
I'm going to throw out a really quick example there. I know that we're short on time, but I've seen a lot of students talk about like private school, like private Catholic school. Yeah. And I believe that it's good because of this critter, right? Of this idea that private school will give moral foundations to these students, right? So that's a critter that you have that belief that's guiding your decisions about education.
Yep. Beautiful. Another critter, and I think a lot of people use this in their engage and reflect one, is the affective domains and emotional aspects. And these are your feelings. Your feelings are critters. I think about, what's the Disney show? Is it Disney? The one where they got the inside and it's their feelings and, dang it, it just went out of my head.
Inside Out.
Yeah, that's it. It's a great example of like critters running around inside of you. Those are these affect. Your affect are your feelings, your emotions. And those things impact what you take in and what you don't take in. And the one that I want to get to is this one, is the third one. It's based upon your self-esteem. So if you have a strong self-esteem, you're usually more open to certain things. But sometimes your self-esteem could be low and you're not taking new things in. Sometimes we act like we have big self-esteem and strong self-esteem, but we don't, and then we're sending mixed messages. But your self-esteem, your feelings towards something, those are critters. Those are real critters running around inside of you, okay? And they influence what you learn and what you don't learn. So anomalies is a great one. This is when our critters start to fall apart. This is when we start to not be able to apply our critters to a new situation. So let's say a new information is taught to us, and we try to use our old knowledge, our old critters to deal with it, and they fail. Like this new information presents us with something that our old stuff just isn't up for. And those are called anomalies. And what the concept change people talk about is when you get enough anomalies, your old critters start to fall apart. That as teachers, what we want to do is create anomalies for our students to deal with. We want to encourage the failure of old ideas in order for new ideas to have room and come in. And so these anomalies are big, huge things. It's when you thought you knew something and you don't. When you got new information, you thought, oh damn, that's wrong. Or and you could still stick with your old concepts, but you got that anomaly out there, this bad example, this wrong example, this thing when it just didn't work right. And those are critters hanging out in your conceptual ecology as well. Okay? So I want to get through, this is the last one. There's other knowledges. So other knowledges, you have backpacks full of knowledge, and they come from different parts of your life. And they come from, maybe you took different classes on things, or you have different experiences with things. And so you have these different backpacks of knowledge that you carry with you. And those other knowledges influence new knowledge, right? So, I have lots of different knowledges. I got this Catholic schooling knowledge about Catholicism and so forth. I got knowledge scouting. I was in Boy Scouts, worked for them for a lot of years. I've studied lots of different topics, folklore and writing and children's culture, things like that. So I've got a lot of different knowledge bases. Everybody does, my kids have these amazing knowledges in horses, which I don't have, amazing knowledges in like Pokemon and stuff like that. And I play Minecraft with them, but they know a hell of a lot more than I do. We have all kinds of knowledges, and those knowledges influence what other knowledges are able to come in. And so you may learn and have a conceptual change because of the current knowledges that are opened up to that new knowledge. But you also could say, I have not had concept change because other knowledges have interfered, have said, no, that's a bunch of crap. So those are a list, an inventory of the critters that run around in our conceptual ecology. And I'll end with this last piece here. And then I'll take any questions or issues. Sorry, we've kind of gone long here, but so the question you're going to be asked in your discernment paper is, to what degree have you experienced conceptual change about some concept in teaching and learning in the last few months, right? And they say this, here's a quote: accommodation, which is conceptual change, accommodation rarely seems characterized by either a flash of insight in which old ideas fall away to be replaced by new visions. They're like, that rarely happens. You don't just go poof, oh, now I have a new concept. What also rarely happens is or a steady logical progression from one commitment to another. They say rarely do we like logically move from one concept to another concept. Now I believe this, and right? Like that rarely happens. Rather, they say, it involves much fumbling about, many false starts and mistakes, and frequent reversals of direction. That we change concepts by trying something out and coming back, and fumbling around and standing back up and running a little ways and then running backwards, and then, all kinds of stuff. And this, in my opinion, is what we're asking you to describe in your paper. To what degree have you had and experienced conceptual change? Well, tell us about the fumblings about. Tell us about the false starts. Tell us about the mistakes, and tell us about the frequent reversals of directions. That would be an interesting paper to write and to read. Is you may not have had conceptual change, or you may have had it. How'd you fumble around? What mistakes did you make? What frequent reversals did you make? That would be a cool paper. And with that, I will end and shut up and take any questions or issues or additions. I'm muting myself. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Caitlin, did you have any questions for us?
I don't think so. I think you guys gave a lot of good information. I can't really, I understand it, I think.
Well, okay, awesome. I guess my only addition, Dr. Roman, would be I want to encourage or emphasize that it's not a clean cut process, right? That there are false starts, there's fumblings around, and it's okay if your paper is, well, I thought this and now I just don't know what to think. That's okay. That's a good paper, because you're showing that you're breaking down this previous thought and you're kind of in the middle of something and you just don't know what's going on, and that's okay. And in that kind of a paper, I'm going to look for, what are your considerations? What do you need? What additional information might you need, or what additional experiences might you need to then move towards a new concept? So that's totally fine if your paper is just kind of, and it's probably going to feel very unnatural to write it, because writing is very much like you have like a clear idea and then you move here and then you move here. But the ideas that you have in this might be, I started with this idea and now there's nothing. And that nothingness or that questioning is your second idea that you move into then. So be confident in that.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's it, everybody. Have a good day. Don't do drugs. And we'll see you later, alligator.